Got my blocks up on the wall. I definitely recommend laying your blocks out. If you have a design wall, that's great. If you don't have a design wall, just lay them out on the floor. I did that for a long time. Works really well. I like to give myself some time to look at it to see if I need to make any adjustments. Pretty happy with how everything turned out. I tried to pay close attention to separating kind of the darker center stars and the lighter ones so that they were kind of mixed up a little bit. That gives it some visual interest. So I think that's good. What I did was started with coral, moved through pinks and purples, and then back down to coral. So I am already thinking about like what I want to use for my backing fabric and stuff. And I think I'm pretty sure binding and backing to both be that coral color, so that since it's so minor in the quilt top, it kind of continues it outside of the quilt. So I'm going to start off by pinning everything, and I'm going to do the vertical rows, and then once the rows are done, I will sew the rows together. So this part actually comes together pretty quickly, especially because the bigger stars are pretty big, so the blocks aren't that small. So I'm gonna get to work on this. I'll show you how I pin, and this part is just kind of autopilot fun for me. I enjoy, until I get to the long seams, I enjoy this part. I'm going to start out with these two blocks. I'm sewing a bigger one to a smaller one. I like to usually have the smaller block on top, so I'm going to pin them in this direction. And I always pin the same way. I pin at the start, pin at the start, I pin at the end, I pin in the middle. I'm going to pin at the seam intersections here. And since I press my seams open, I always am making sure that I pin that open on the back. I'll pin at this seam intersection, and then I'm going to pin between all of them, which might seem like excessive pinning, but I do find it really helps keep all my layers even and helps that my points line up. So you don't have to do it, but I'm going to do it. So I'm going to pin all my blocks, and once I get that done, I will start sewing. I've now sewn all of my long rows together, so these are all sewn together, and so now I just need to sew the rows together. So every small block should have a seam that it can match up with a big block, so make sure you pin at those so that nothing gets shifted and everything gets lined up nicely. I'm going to get to work on this. Okay, I'm going to make the borders for my Helen quilt, and I have right here just some width of fabric strips cut from various different colors that were used in the background of my quilt. If you're using smaller pieces, you just need to sew them all together until you have a total of about 275 inches. I'm going to sew all these together, which will get me about there, and then I'll cut my border pieces from that long strip. So I think that's a lot easier than trying to make a strip an exact size. To make a long one and then cut it down is a lot, I think it's faster and easier. So that's what I'm going to do. I'm going to sew these. I've taken the selvage off of them. I'm going to sew them end to end, and then I will cut them down to size. I have all of my binding strip, or all of my border strips sewn together now. So you always want to make sure all of your seams are facing the right direction if you're using solids. So they all are. They've been pressed. So I don't like having to cut really long pieces of fabric. So what I'm going to do is the two smaller borders need to be 60.5 inches. So I'm going to actually measure it out to 30.25 inches and fold it in half. So to me, that is just much easier. So the way I'm going to measure 30.25 is I have my 24.5 inch ruler, and then I need 6 more inches. So I've got this here to use together. So now I'm going to set ruler here. I need an additional 6 inches. I just have the rulers butted up next to each other. And I'm going to line up a horizontal line with the strip so that I make sure my cut is straight. And then I'm going to cut over here. And I've got my first border strip. When I unfold it, it's the right size. All right, so the only thing that I do when I'm adding the border is that I use a lot of pins, because it's really easy for the 2 layers to slip a little bit so your seam allowances don't match up, and the one underneath gets a little bit less of a seam allowance, and we don't want that. And lots of pins will help the fabric feed through the machine evenly so everything is the right size. I'm just putting a pin about every couple of inches. You're going to want to do the top and bottom borders first and then do the side ones, because that's what the instructions say. You can write the instructions the other way, but I didn't do it. So if you try to do it the other way, your borders will be the wrong size. All right, so I'm going to get these all pinned on. I'm going to sew the borders, and then I will be done with my quilt top.